CEO goes undercover. In his own garage and finds a black mechanic risking his life with dangerous tools. The wealthy CEO thought he knew everything about his empire, but curiosity drove him into a disguise and into the depths of his own property. What he found shocked him. In one of his 8 massive garages, a black mechanic was working alone with tools so old and dangerous they could snap at any moment. The man's hands were scarred, his body drenched in sweat, and his life hung in the balance with every spark and slip. The CEO thought he was just inspecting his assets, but what he discovered was a raw, brutal truth about neglect, inequality, and the hidden struggles buried beneath wealth. The CEO lived a life many could only dream of: towering glass offices, sprawling mansions, and garages filled with vintage cars that most people had only seen in magazines. He prided himself on success, discipline, and his ability to grow a company from nothing into a billion-dollar empire. Yet, like many at the top, he was disconnected from the daily struggles of those who worked under him. One evening, instead of attending another glittering dinner with investors, he decided to do something unusual. He put on worn clothes, a cap, and dark glasses, an undercover disguise that would let him walk unnoticed through his own properties. His plan was simple: see how his employees really lived and worked when they thought no one important was watching. He started with one of his garages, a cavernous space where he stored rare cars worth millions. It was a place he almost never visited, leaving its upkeep to supervisors. But as he slipped through the side door, expecting to find order and perfection, what he saw instead left him speechless. In the far corner of the garage, a lone black mechanic was bent over a classic car, his face glistening with sweat, his hands trembling as he gripped a rusty tool. Sparks flew dangerously close to his skin. The equipment looked decades old, patched together, and unsafe. The CEO's heart tightened. How could someone in his world of wealth be forced to work in such conditions? The CEO lingered in the shadows, watching. Every movement of the mechanic seemed like a fight for survival. The tools clanged, screeched, and shuddered in his grip. A drill slipped and nearly caught his hand, leaving a streak of blood across his knuckles. He didn't stop. He simply wiped it with an oil-stained rag and continued working as though pain was just another part of his day. The CEO's pulse quickened. This wasn't the polished image his managers always presented during meetings. This was raw, dangerous reality. He noticed something else. The mechanic's uniform was torn and faded, the soles of his boots nearly worn through. Each time he adjusted his stance, the floor beneath him creaked, littered with sharp fragments of metal and broken parts. It wasn't just unsafe, it was dehumanizing. As the CEO observed, he heard faint voices drifting in from outside, other workers laughing and talking. Yet this man was alone, isolated, as if pushed aside into the worst corner of the garage. A troubling thought struck him. Was this neglect random or deliberate? He remembered boardroom discussions where supervisors often glossed over minor workforce issues. Now he wondered if those issues weren't so minor after all. The mechanic wasn't just poorly equipped. He was being disregarded, left with tools no one else would dare to touch. The mechanic paused to catch his breath, and the CEO noticed his exhaustion. His shoulders sagged as though carrying more than just physical labor. There was a quiet dignity in the way he worked, focused, determined, refusing to quit despite every obstacle. It was resilience born from struggle, but also a silent reminder of how people like him were often treated, overlooked, undervalued, and placed in harm's way without care. The CEO felt a knot of guilt in his chest. All his wealth, all his garages, and yet here was a man risking his life to keep the engines of his empire running. He had built his fortune on the promise of excellence and innovation, but hidden behind the luxury was a truth he couldn't ignore. Racism and inequality had seeped into the very foundation of his success. The breaking point came in an instant. The mechanic lifted a jagged, outdated cutting tool to slice through a piece of metal. Sparks exploded violently, showering his arms. The tool bucked, screeched, and slipped from his grasp, crashing to the floor with a sound that echoed across the garage. The man stumbled, his hand narrowly missing the blade. The CEO rushed forward instinctively, his disguise nearly forgotten. His heart pounded as he realized how close the mechanic had come to serious injury, or worse. The mechanic steadied himself, his chest heaving. He didn't cry out or demand help. Instead, he crouched down, picked up the dangerous tool, and prepared to continue, as if accidents and risks were just part of his job description. For the CEO, it was the moment of undeniable truth. This wasn't just about tools or equipment. It was about a system that had quietly decided some workers deserved less care, less respect, and less safety, often because of the color of their skin. His mind flashed with images of luxury cars, polished to perfection, dinners with crystal glasses, and millions spent on branding. Yet in this very garage, a black man was being forced to work with scraps, as though his life was worth less than the machines he repaired. The CEO felt both anger and shame. Anger at the supervisors who allowed this, shame at himself for never questioning what lay beneath the glossy reports. In that moment, his disguise was useless, because the truth had already been revealed, not about him, but about the broken system he had built. The CEO left the garage shaken. The image of the mechanic burned into his mind. He knew that writing a check or replacing a few tools wouldn't fix what he had seen. This wasn't about charity. It was about justice. The next morning he returned, not in disguise, but openly. Supervisors scrambled to greet him, smiling nervously. But instead of praise, he demanded accountability. He walked straight to the garage, gathered every worker, and pointed to the rusted, dangerous tools scattered across the floor. No one, he declared, should ever risk their life to keep this company running. Not here. Not anywhere. It wasn't just an order to buy new equipment. It was a commitment to overhaul the culture of neglect and inequality that had festered under his watch. For the first time, the workers saw their CEO not as a distant figure of wealth, but as someone willing to confront uncomfortable truths. As for the mechanic, he stood quietly, his eyes tired but steady. He had endured in silence for years, carrying scars both visible and invisible. Now, at last, his struggle had been seen. The CEO knew he couldn't erase the past, but he could change the future. He vowed to make safety and dignity non-negotiable for every worker, regardless of race or position. And yet, the story lingers with a haunting question. Why did it take a disguise, a near accident, and a hidden truth to open his eyes? Racism in Dao. The workplace doesn't always roar. It often hides in silence, in neglected corners, in the unequal weight carried by those who are unseen. And unless we look closely, we risk letting entire lives be defined by struggle instead of opportunity. So ask yourself, in your world, who is working in the shadows, unseen, unheard, and unprotected? And what will you do when you finally see them?